Hi, everyone. We are continuing with the series of discussions with professionals in communication. I wanted to inform our guest today, Racheal Nakitare, who is located in Kenya, and I will present her briefly in just a moment, that this is an eclectic group of students. Although not all of them will be online through Zoom, they will have the opportunity to watch the recorded video later, and they will react in the next 2 days or so, because the sessions are in 2-3 days, twice a week. So this is a summer course of 5 weeks. So we have to compress everything into smaller sessions, but pretty intense. This is an elective course of 400 level, in which I have undergraduate students, graduate students from my proper applied communication studies department, but also from the international studies program where I am a director, and also some students from other programs. So it's an eclectic group. So again, this is an activity that is required for them. They are supposed to watch this discussion or participate in it directly, and then react to the discussion in the proper way. So let me do a short introduction to our guest today. Racheal Nakitare is a seasoned broadcast journalist with a master's in communication studies from the University of Nairobi, Kenya. She studied new media and conflict transformation at Philip Merrill School of Journalism, the University of Maryland, under the prestigious Hubert Humphrey Fellowship. Racheal is the acting television programs manager at the Kenya Broadcasting Corporation and has worked extensively on addressing hate speech in and through the media, as well as on advocacy for women's rights online. She is the immediate former president of the International Association of Women in Radio and Television, IORT. Racheal is the EJN's Africa representative and previously served as a board member of the Ethical Journalism Network. So thank you very much for accepting to participate in this discussion with us. And I know that your time is precious, so we said that this discussion can go on around about an hour or so. So let me start with the questions from the professor. I'm privileged in this position. What visuals are important in the world today and why, to your perception?
Thank you, Serene. It's a pleasure to meet you and the students. At least we've spoken before, but I haven't met you students. Yeah, when you talked about visual communication, I just, first, the most important thing for me that always comes to mind, and maybe that is how I picked to be in television and not radio when I was training, is that a picture speaks 1,000 words. You know, one picture carries so much message, it saves you so much space, it communicates so much. Of course, there's been a lot of evolution over the times, and a lot of what we're using in media, we're seeing in media now, is infographics. We're using a lot of infographics to give information. This is because when you have the infographics, the message is a lot easier. A lot of viewers, a lot of even listeners are now following our content on social media platforms. Now, if you're looking at the social media platforms, for example, Twitter is a very professional platform. So if you're following a discussion on Twitter, you are only allowed so many characters. So with that limitation, the best that you can do is use the pictures, and the pictures have actually been working. If you look at Twitter that is mainly used by professionals, you will find that there's more picture use than any other social media platform because of the limitation of the word. So infographics are very catchy when it comes to media, because one, it leaves an impression on your viewer. They'll remember that there was a chart, for example, that showed there was so many male and female. For example, if you're using a chart and they're just two sticks that are showing male and female, you'll definitely get the message very quickly, which of the two is higher than the other, before you even go into the explanations. So a lot of the infographics are being used now. A lot of pictures continue to be used. A lot of maps, like now during this corona virus mapping, when you're trying to show, when you're showing them, when you're looking for people who may have related with a patient and you're trying to map it out and you're showing where they may be concentrated in a city like Nairobi, we've been using the maps a lot. It's just easy to put the map and then to show this is where we have a lot of concentration, this is a hotspot, this is where the first case came from, and this is how it's been able to grow. So the maps are being used a lot. Then we are seeing a lot of a split screen also as a visual. Split screen where you have your TV, and I mean, like what we are doing now, all of you on the screen, so that you're able to communicate with so many people at the same time, but also pass so much information. And that has been very helpful, especially this time when a lot of the people that we are interviewing are not able to come to the studio. Then we'll just use the split screen, either carry a TV view or a live view camera to one of the people that you're interviewing and have your host in the studio, or even use the Zoom or WebEx and be able to carry out your interview. So the split screen has actually come into use, and it's being very, very effective, especially for media. And then you're able to toss the screens around, like switch them around, have one person speaking, then have the three of them at the same time, the director calls the shots. We have what we call the on-air graphics, and what has also, which is more like also a recent trend, is that the on-air graphics, we have, in the lower tabs where you have a lot of graphics coming on the screen, even as we are talking now. For example, if I was on the screen, then you'd have so much information about me under here, and maybe scrolls of what is happening elsewhere in news. So that is the lower tabs, and it's also a way of passing on so much information within a very short time, because now trends are that viewers are also not able to stay and wait and watch long programs. So you try to have as much information through the visuals as possible, so that the viewer is able to choose. I can choose to follow the scrolls that are giving updates on what is happening. I can choose to listen to what somebody's saying. I can choose to just have a statistic that is on the lower tabs that is telling me so many patients have been diagnosed with COVID-19 as at in the last 24 hours. So the lower tabs and the on-air graphics have also been a lot in use lately. We have what I call, okay, Photoshop. You all understand about Photoshop. Photoshop has been used a lot, especially in very incriminating ways, like it's very unethical, but actually when you can also use it ethically. Unethical where people have been photoshopped, and we've been cheated, that where this is where fake news comes in. You realize that somebody, somebody's picture is used and graphics are used, and a lot of words that maybe the person did not use are used, and then later you realize. And that's why we actually are now advocating that every time you get any information, especially the visual, is good for you to fact check, to just be sure that the information that you have is actually authentic. Then we have what we call augmented reality. And augmented reality is also one of the latest visuals that we're using that is very effective, because it saves, as in the past you had, if I wanted to show you the lions in the park in Nairobi, for example, I would need to physically go to the park and take those shots. But now you can create that effect in the studio, have me seated in the studio, and have a lion walk, past me, or towards me, or even come and sit next to me, and give the effect and the story the way you want it. But those are some of the ones I can think on top of my head. But I think, like I said from the onset, PR people, marketers use visuals a lot, because it saves time. It gives so much information within a very short time. and then it's very catchy to the eye, you know, like it's attractive. It's not, imagine reading 5 pages of a book and just having one page that gives you all the information that will be in the 5 pages. So I think it's that is the way we're moving, and with the advent of technology now, I think it's only getting better.
Okay. Okay, connected to this, how can those visuals and texts that accompany them be understood, interpreted, evaluated? And I'm thinking also about, you know, what is ethical, um, what is doable with the technology that you have available, and what is acceptable from the population amidst which you are working in broadcasting.
First, from an ethical point of view, is that when you have the text and the picture, they're supposed to be complementary. They cannot be competing. You know, you'll be confusing your reader or your viewer if you have conflicting information, like the information, the graphics, the text being different from the picture that you're showing. So I think most important when you're talking about visual communication is that the text has to complement the picture. That is very critical. Then, because of the many graphics, the many visuals that are being used now, I think it's becoming a very specialized skill. And so it actually requires very special skills to be able to interpret, for example, data. You know, for you to be able to interpret data that you've been given on text and get the graphics for it, there has to be some very good understanding of how to interpret that data. So I think the basics about understanding the text or understanding the data is critical in coming up with visuals that can then effectively show what you want, what you want to relate to the public. A lot of the challenges that we are having with fake news, and if a skilled or a professional journalist looks at sometimes at a caption or even at a picture, you know, considering that you understand the basics of journalism, you quickly have to your first instinct is to try to verify, you know, like always verify, is this the correct information? So during that verification, that is when you now start to look and realize that, okay, maybe this has been photoshopped, maybe this is a true picture, maybe this is somebody's picture, but the text is not theirs, you know, has just been merged together. And so at the bottom or at the base of any of the visuals, especially that we're using in media, it is very important to have the right skills to be able to interpret that data. Because if you don't have those skills, then you cannot bring out the best visual interpretation of what you want to relay.
Right. What you're saying seems very much, you know, oriented towards the skills of the consumer of news. But just yesterday, I was participating in a discussion with the PR Council in the United States, and you know, PR and marketing operatives are saying all the time that the best media is the earned media, the one that is truthful, that the one that is maybe a little bit embellished, maybe a little bit on the positive side, but it will be checked by the consumers in time, and they will say, hey, this product that you promoted in this manner is not really at the hype that you wanted it to be. So the people, the consumers will get wise in a short while and not buy your product or services if they are not of the quality that you advocate that they are. So what do you think about that?
That is correct. I totally agree. And that's why I said you must have the basic skills first to be able to interpret data before you can visualize it, before you can put it on whatever graphics, whatever you choose to use, whether they are graphs, whether they are pies, whether they, you know, you must have that understanding so that you display it in the best way possible, because consumers are not stupid. Consumers know what they want. And so you cannot be displaying, you can't um, come up with a product and because use the visuals to make it very beautiful and yet not have that required or desired result. And that actually is why when you look at things like advertisements will try to be very catchy, but they also have to be as real as possible. You have to have done, like you can't give information about figures that are not real. You know, that would actually be fake, and that will not be believed. And there's nothing as bad as your consumer or your client losing their trust in you. You know, you completely lose it. And now the public has so much to pick from. You know, they may choose, they have so many platforms to pick from that if they do not trust a channel, if they don't trust you and they forget about you, it's very unlikely that they'll come back unless there's really something very important that you're carrying. So being truthful, being ethical should actually form the basis of any visuals that you come up with.
My last question, and then we'll go to the student questions. How do visuals contribute to media and public discourse representations of women and girls, particularly in the African context, but also worldwide?
Women and girls, the visuals, okay, if I get your question right, like I started by saying, the visuals are very, you know, we are living in a very engendered world now. And one of the statistics that we look out for when you're looking at statistics of any issue are the gender representation. You know, even as we report about COVID here now, you know, all the time we'll talk about the numbers, we'll talk about the place where maybe the numbers have been identified, and then we'll also talk about the gender, you know, among those that have been identified, how many were men and how many are female and how many are male. So I think graphics, when it comes to visuals, it's very easy to tell, to display or to interpret gender. For example, a lot of the stories that you may want to carry on, there are testimonies of COVID. COVID is kind of stigmatized for now, and not everybody would want to wants to show their face and wants to be identified. But even when you use a silhouette, you know, just the silhouette, the way it, you know, the way the visual appears will tell you when it is a male or when it is a female. It's very easy for interpretation. When you come to signs, even, you know, like you all know the sign of what is representative of male and what is representative of female. So I think that has been, I think the visuals have been very helpful in getting that aggregated data when it comes to gender, so that in everything that that in every visual that you are displaying, it's very, very easy to pick out what gender you're talking about, either the gender you are addressing or the gender that is being used to illustrate the visual that you're displaying.
Yeah, I'm sure that my last question might appear a little bit out of the blue for my students as compared to the previous two questions, but this is influenced by the fact that, you know, I know you through my wife, Diana, who was also a member of IORT, International Association of Women in Radio and Television. And a few years ago, you were together in a project that was assessing kind of the percentage of women excuse me, um, that are presented in news shows and in other shows. I remember that we recorded hours and hours of shows in Great Britain, the United States, in countries in Africa, in Europe, and so on and so forth. And we were discovering that actually, you know, there's a huge difference gap between the number of women stories that we hear on the news. So you see, it's not only the visuals, but it's also how much time you get as a presence when we're talking about the gender situation, but also certain minorities, certain categories of population in different countries that are presented or not. If they are not present in the discussion, if they are not, their stories are not told, the people think they have no problems, they have no issues. Look at the discussion nowadays in the United States on issues of a certain minority. And that's why it started from Minneapolis, but now it's around the world. And it's not like the issues are not known, but they are not presented enough.
That is right. That's so correct. When you talk about aggregating the data in terms of gender, it helps because what is common, what we see here is that there's, okay, for example, you go to an event and you get the story talking about giving some up sounds, some uh, voice of what the male people, what the male politicians said at a meeting. And then what will come about the ladies will actually be describing how they were dressed, how they walked in, who they walked in with, sometimes even the colors of the clothes that they're wearing. So we're getting very, very sensitive. The research we did has helped, especially my organization that I work for, to come up with a gender committee, and we're very, very sensitive to gender representation. And that's why I told you now, there's always that sensitivity about in everything you're reporting, you're thinking, have I balanced? If it's an interview panel, then do you have at least gender representation of both gender? If you have two ladies, then there must be a man. And if there are two men, then the third must be a lady. And also when you're reporting now, then when you're looking at statistics, it's always good to pull out those and say, there were so many ladies and there were so many, there were so many female and there were so many male. So that is I think we're becoming alive to it and aware more and more, and it's getting more pronounced even in our assignments, that now there's deliberate attempt to ensure that there's some kind of balance.
Right. Let me switch to the questions from the students, and I will start with a question from Caitlin because she's present here. Hi, Caitlin. Uh, and I printed here the questions that I collected yesterday from everybody in class. So she asks, how do we as women in public relations brand and frame content regarding equality that all genders can relate to and understand?
Come again?
So how do we as women in public relations brand and frame content regarding equality that all genders can relate to and understand?
As public relations, I think it's most important is to know your audience. Who are you packaging for? Because it's very important that you could be packaging for men only, you could be packaging for women only, you could be packaging for the general public. So the most important is to understand who your audience are or who your client is. And once that happens, then you actually package. It just guides you in terms of packaging. For example, if it's a beauty product and you're talking to the ladies, you know that the ladies will want to look nice. You know that they want to be appreciated. So then you'll focus on color, you'll focus on, the difference in terms of the effect. You'll talk about the skin, it depends on whether, if you're talking to the men and you want them to appreciate the women, you cannot antagonize them and start telling the men, you're not doing this. You also have to appeal to them. You have to get their buy-in, and like I said, viewers are very sensitive and they know exactly what they want. So never assume that your audience are not aware. Do not underestimate your audience. Always know that they know exactly what they want. And because you want to appeal to them, then you must then package what you have with them in mind. I always remember when I was growing up, there's a vegetable that I didn't like, and I remember one time making it in my style, and I was making for guests, and my auntie telling me, "Remember, you're not making it to eat; you're making it for your guests. So you use the acceptable standards that the guest will appreciate, not what you appreciate." So I would just that is just another whatever that I would give.
Right. Our aunties always taught us to be more invitational.
A word?
Our aunties, right? You said that an auntie taught you that lesson in life.
Yes.
So our aunties in all cultures, I think, are more invitational.
Exactly. It's an analogy I use all the time when I remember. I have to remember all the time that I'm not doing it for me, I'm doing it for them. So then apply the acceptable standards.
Right, right. And people always feel better when they are around food, right?
Yes.
Okay, so I would like to give the floor now to my students. If you don't have the questions with you, I have them in front of me so I can ask the question for you. But Caitlin, can you ask your second question? And don't forget to unmute yourself.
Yeah, okay. With the current political climate in the United States, how have brands begun to use their advertisements to get viewers talking about serious issues? So like I've seen several brands like take on rainbow themed merchandise to talk about Pride Month, but with like COVID-19 and the Black Lives Matter movement, how have we seen this like around the world that brands are using it to talk?
Mm, okay. I don't know whether I got your question right, but if I didn't, you can correct me. What I have seen is we brands are getting very personalized. You know, like there's so much diversity that even people, the manufacturers, are ensuring that there's a very broad variety to pick from. So what I have been seeing, like now, I travel quite a bit, and sometimes I come to the United States. There was a time, every time I came to the United States, I would come back with like almost 5 suitcases because, you know, I've done all the shopping. But I think because the world has opened up, now I get a lot of those things even on the shelves here. You know, you just have to move around and to be to 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 have a nose for what you need and what the new products on the market are, and you'll get products that I usually get in the US now here. Now, what I have just noticed is there is a bit of difference in the quality of some of the stuff. I can point out 1 or 2 lotions that I've bought here, and the texture on my skin has not felt exactly the same, you know? So I don't know whether products are made for specific markets. I think there's influence, you know, like what is selling on the American market has influence for all other markets across the world. But I think the suppliers or the manufacturers have also specialized in ensuring that they're making the right product for the right market, so that they could have the same brand name, but you realize that maybe the brand, the product that you have has an element, an extra element that is added maybe because of your weather conditions, as opposed to what is in mind because of consideration of also the climatic conditions in Africa. I don't know whether that's what you asked.
Yeah, kind of. It's more so about like how brands have like taken on maybe more political issues to like show their support.
If I
Oh, okay.
if I can intervene here, for
Okay.
example, it's very relevant in the United States. You know, Nike and the campaign that used the image, the brand of Kaepernick. But you see, most of the people look at the TV looking for entertainment. You cannot be serious all the time, and the media has this problem. If they're trying to bring up issues that are serious, about social issues, about political issues, and so on and so forth, they are boring. But there's an ebb and flow. Look, it's very relevant now to talk about social issues. And everybody wants to talk about social issues like they didn't exist before. Um, but that's the problem with humans, that you are relevant at the moment when the humans will care for those issues. So what is,
No,
sorry for interrupting, Racheal.
no, that's okay. Sorry, there's a bit of you're disconnecting, but I get it. Okay. Talking about the influence on topics, I think the world is so, you know, we used to talk about globalization. I think it's really a global village now. And the issues that you are grappling with about the minorities in the US, for example, becomes the kind point, the issue of discussion even here in Nairobi. You look at the social media platforms, and they're all awash with what is happening in the US. And there's all these trying to compare, like looking at the situation there and trying to compare with our situation here and making it relevant here. Of course, there are people here who will discuss about what is happening in the US as though they live in the US. They understand it so well that you can actually assume or begin to imagine that they live in the US. But then that discussion, we realize, affects even us here in Nairobi and in Africa. Through those discussions, you get, it has a multiplier effect. It's like a spiral that gets in. And so maybe if I can look at an example like the racial issues that are happening there, maybe for us here, it's not quite racial, it's now tribal, We have tribal issues that then people begin to talk about exactly the same thing, but now from a different, they contextualize it. And now we talk more about, we see what is happening, and then you say, this is exactly what we are grappling with here, but now not at that magnitude, but at the level of our tribal differences.
Okay. Caitlin, are you done with your questions? Caitlin, are you done with your questions? Can you hear me? Okay. Let's move to Gabby then. I see that you asked a very interesting question here. Do you have the question in front of you, Gabby?
Yes, I do. So my first one is, as a seasoned broadcast journalist who is passionate about gender equality and the empowerment of women, how do you combat hate speech that promotes inequities of women?
Thank you. That's like my favorite. Yes, we have, unfortunately, hate speech is always taken in context. Unfortunately for us here, issues of gender, issues of patriarchy are real. We may want to wish them away, but they are very real. So what we do is you have to find a very systematic way of approaching them. And one of the best ways to go about it is to ensure that they're entrenched in policy. So one of the things that we did, for example, as the International Association of Women in Radio and Television, we realized that there was a lot of inequality in the media space, both on the screen and even in the offices in terms of management. And so, you can talk about it in boardrooms, and you'll talk until the chicken come home, but nothing will happen. So what we did is we then engaged in research that is clearly showed the disparities that we were talking about. Then this research, the results, the findings were shared with the management. And so management realized this is an issue that we have to deal with head on. And so the first way to do that was to form a gender committee at the office. And then the gender committee then was sensitized to come up with a gender mainstreaming policy. Now, there is a policy that actually guides the workers in terms of how to ensure that there's balanced gender on the screen, on all discussions, and even in management. Just in the same way, during when we were reviewing our constitution in 2010, about 10 years ago, there was a clause that requires 2/3 gender representation at all levels of management, all across all sectors. I think people are looking at the larger constitution at that time, and they did not realize that there was this clause in here that is very critical in moving forward. So because of the men, sorry to use that, focusing on the political aspect of the constitution actually went through wholesale. So now that clause on the 2/3 gender representation actually helps all departments to ensure that they have that extra eye for gender representation. And that's where we've had a lot of women get at least into appointment, into political offices, into leadership. And also it is an issue that is even still being discussed in our parliament, because there are times when we feel like the parliament is not constitutionally constituted because there isn't a 1/3 representation of the women. And so it is an issue that they've now decided that we will work on progressively. You know, like they have to make sure that that is achieved within a very specific timeline. And now we are thinking by the next elections, there has to be a very deliberate attempt to nominate more women into parliament so that we get the required 1/3 gender representation of women in parliament. So I think for me, in a nutshell, I think the most important is to study, get what the issue is, then see how to entrench it in a policy that then makes it move forward. Because otherwise it's always back and forth. And if it's not entrenched in some kind of policy, then it gets lost.
Right, thank you. That was a really good explanation. And that kind of leads me into my second question. You covered it a little bit talking about gender mainstreaming, but it's oftentimes strategic measures have to be employed in order to ensure equality for all people. With that being said, is the strategy of gender mainstreaming really important in achieving gender equity and gender equality?
Yeah, gender mainstreaming certainly for me is very important, because once you mainstream, once you ensure that both gender are on board, then now you can ensure that the practical bits, because it takes time, it takes a bit of sensitization, it takes a bit of lobbying, but sometimes you also have to be strategic, like you say. I know that some of our members of parliament have also gotten to points where the ladies say, we will not support you with whatever motions you're bringing unless you are able to support also our motion on the 2/3 gender rule, or on the 1/3 gender representation. So I think in whichever way you want to achieve gender mainstreaming, you must be strategic about it. You can't push it down people's throats, but you can get smart about it. Have I answered you?
Yes, you have. Thank you.
Okay, let's move to Ekindra. Do you have the questions in front of you?
Yes, I do have a questions. So my questions is, today we have seen media partition within a political ideology. For instance, CNN and versus Fox in the United States, and then we can see this trend all over the world. In democracy, the press accepted to be a neutral and presenting the truth to the public, but it's hard to see nowadays. In your perspective, do you think media bipartisan weakening the democratic society? If yes, how you view society in the how you view American society today, and where do you see American society in democratic process? And I would like to add these questions in whole world.
Okay. You are cutting a bit. I don't know whether I got the full question, but it's something to do with media being bipartisan. Is that so?
Right.
Okay. I'll tell you from the Kenyan experience. It's first and foremost one person. There's a school of thought of people argued that it is not humanly possible to be objective. You know, we are human. You can't possibly, because one of the strong ethical requirements of a journalist or of media is to be objective. And somebody argued and said, it's not humanly possible to be objective. But as long as you're guided by the professional ethics of journalism, then you can actually throw your own feelings out of it, out of a story, out of a situation, and ensure that you are balanced, that you're objective. But what is different, I know I've been in the US, and yes, I see the different positions that, for example, CNN and Fox and the other media houses or companies display. Now, in Kenya and a lot of the African countries, we have one big challenge that affects that ideology issue. the biggest challenge that we have is that media has been known to be very powerful in terms of messaging and reaching the public. And so instead of just having like two strong media houses that have opposing or support the different, the opposing sides of the political divide, we have politicians owning, making sure that they're investing in media. So that you will get that, for example, almost all our media, our main media houses or our main politicians in Kenya have a hand on some media house. They own it, not just influence, but they own. So that becomes very, very difficult because if really you are the owner, how do you expect me to objectively report about you? It becomes a tool of propaganda instead of being an objective report from a media house. So one of the suggestions, proposals that has been put forward by the Media Council of Kenya is that politicians should actually not be allowed to own media houses because that kind of paralyzes. Media is actually looked at as a commercial entity rather than public good, service for public service good. And so that has been a big, big challenge so that you get people with vested interests in the media houses. And then where they do not have these vested interests, there is then the cancer of brown envelope where journalists are bribed, or given what they might say call tokens to be able to report in certain ways. That has been a big, big issue that is talked about all the time, that is grappled with all the time. And so if the media, if the politicians can be stopped, or if it was possible for politicians not to own media houses, and for media houses also not to be looked at as commercial entities, but be looked at as a service to the public, then I think we'll have we'll have made headway in terms of remaining very true to of service to the public. But that notwithstanding, I think our situation is a bit different because I find in the US, it's very easy because, for example, during political time, you find a media house declaring and saying, we support candidate ABC. In Kenya, no media house comes out clearly to say, we support this candidate. You will see it in the editorials, you'll see it in the reports, then you'll begin to feel this candidate, this media house favors this candidate. But it is more the reporters and the reporters being influenced to report in a certain way rather than the stand of a media house. Because even if, for example, a politician owns a media house, besides not reporting the truth about that politician, you have a lot of other content to report on that you can be objective about. So the difference between us and you, the difference between Kenya and the US, for example, is that we do not have those strong ideologies. Even our political parties may have very good, what are they called? They are constitutions that talk about certain ideologies. But practically, when you see what they do every day, then you don't see them gravitating towards any given ideology. Our politics is more about personalities, is more about supporting a certain candidate. It is it's usually the president and the opposing, the main opposition leader, or the party in power and the party in opposition. And then other small parties begin to coalesce around the big parties, so that we lose our track in terms of ideology and focus more on the personality. I support so-and-so, and so I go with this person. There was even a joke about one of the people who was asked what he thought about during the referendum, what they thought about the constitution. And he said, if so-and-so if a candidate so-and-so supports it, then it's good. So I go for it, So you don't bother about reading it. You don't know what is in it. It is because you support this candidate who supports it, then you go for it. You support this candidate who is against it, then you go against it. So that is the big difference.
Okay, Akindra, do you have a second question?
Yes, I do have a
What?
second questions also. So my second questions is a new communication tools like advertisement has a huge impact in our society. From your perspective, how advertisement can contribute strengthen democratic society nowadays?
I think it would be difficult for advertising to strengthen democracy, for example, because besides the politicians who own the media houses, like I told you, a lot of the media houses here are viewed as commercial entities. So they end up compromising, especially on reports that touch on their main clients. We have some clients that are very big clients, like the mobile companies, have a lot of money, for example. And so, if you're going to give an objective report about something that they have done, then you risk losing the commercial that then the advertisement that comes to your media house. So I think, in my view, I think we need very clear regulation by an oversighting body that ensures that advertisements are in a completely different category from reports, from journalistic reports. And an oversighting body that ensures that if, for example, a media house is held ransom by an advertising company because of certain reports, then action is taken against, some kind of tribunal that kind of runs that. Because otherwise, there's a lot of influence. And, it's like man eats where he works, So there's no way you can't bite the hand that feeds you, because that's where the money is coming from. So it would be very difficult to disengage or to divorce advertisement from media. For example, in Kenya, media houses rely on advertisement 100%. That is where all the revenue comes from. So that is why they find themselves held hostage. So if advertising could be run, regulated by an agency that oversees that all ethical standards are kept in journalism, and then that there's a very clear distinction and line between advertising and day-to-day journalism, then that would help. That is my view.
Okay. Good. Let me ask now some questions from the students who weren't able to participate directly. So I have a graduate student who's from Nigeria, Francis Akambi, and he is asking, while there is a lot of debate between what constitutes a persuasive message and what constitutes propaganda, what are your thoughts on propaganda being conceived as a one-way communication process and persuasion as a two-way communication process? And is all propaganda unethical?
Wow, that's a tough one. Propaganda is definitely one way. Propaganda is very specific. It is this message has to be delivered, has to be received by my target. I have to achieve this through whichever means. So it is actually one way, because you craft your message in a way that once it gets to your target, the message is home. And that is why when it comes to propaganda, it has a lot of lies. And this is where also issues of fake news comes in, because when you're dealing with fake news, you design your message knowing this is fake. I am lying, but I need to influence people in this way. So it's one way. You said the other one is persuasive?
The other one is persuasion as a two-way communication process.
Persuasion is two-way. The reason persuasion is two-way as opposed to propaganda is that much as you're crafting your message, for example, advertisement is persuasion. And that is why I said at the beginning, in advertising, you are crafting a message to sell a product, to influence or to make your product appeal to your client. And you expect that feedback by them appreciating your product. You know, there's a buy-in in what you're selling, there's the buy-in in what you're trying to give. So though it may not be directly giving back to you and telling you this is my response, but it gets to be two-way, because you are persuading me, and then you will know that I'm persuaded by me taking your product. So there's a return, let me say there's return on investment in persuasion. But in propaganda, it is just, you need to hit, and sometimes propaganda is chancing. But you just want to achieve that at that time and move on, you know? It's short-lived. The gains are short-lived, but persuasion is, in persuasion, it is continuous. It is, you have to keep improving what you have. You have to keep, and that is why sometimes it's two-way is I'm selling soap. Depending on how my clients appreciate and buy that soap, I will know if it's been received well, and I will continue improving it. You know, the feedback I get when it doesn't sell, then I know that I need to improve my product. So it's a continuous, you know, like improvement as you move on, as opposed to propaganda where you just throw it out there and pray that it's taken the way that you've put it. And sometimes you may be discovered, you know, like it's propaganda.
Yes, and I would add here that, only certain institutions in any country around the world can afford nowadays to still put out propagandistic messages. For example, representatives of a government in power, well-established old institutions of the state or that are liked by the population. For example, the church. The term propaganda actually studied with an institute per la propaganda fide in Italy, in Rome, you know, the ones that were propagandizing the faith. So that's a message that usually is sent out there by institutions that are already recognized and in power and old and perceived by the population as in tune with a constitution, with, oh, my parents did the same, my grandparents did the same. We cannot not trust the government until there are certain issues, you know. So let me ask you an interesting question here that I highlighted from another student. Her name is Caitlin Opp. With so many visuals flooding in during the current protests, how do you ensure that the visual is being interpreted correctly, as many are being used out of context on social media?
Okay, come again, please.
So with so many visuals flooding in during the current protests, how do you ensure that the visual is being interpreted correctly, as many are being used out of context on social media?
Okay, I think that's what I think I mentioned that in one of the previous questions, that because of social media posed a challenge that answers that almost adds to the question we just talked about, in terms of social media has opened up the space so that in the past it was only media that churned out information, churned out the message. And it was then easy to know that it has come from media. Now, communication is two-way. You know, everybody is a writer. You know, everybody is a citizen journalist. That poses a big danger to the industry, and that is why the issue of training has become very critical in journalism. Even for people who trained and went through all the courses required, there is need for refreshing because of the challenges that have come with fake news. And so there are very specific skills that you have to learn to be able to verify quickly and to also be able to check, you know, what we are calling fact checking. There's a lot of courses going on fact checking, where as soon as you see a picture, there are a few tips. You'll just look at that picture and then you'll know it is fake. For example, if it's Photoshopped, you'll quickly look at it and realize this has been Photoshopped. People have even gone into sometimes carrying an old picture that was used many years back and brings it to the current and just makes it look like this is happening now. So there are very specific fact-checking tools that are being taught to all journalists now, and especially a lot of media, because of now the fines that come with carrying, for example, fake stories or carrying a fake picture. You're carrying a wrong picture that is not supposed to be carried. So there are very specialized training that is undertaken by journalists and by people in the media to ensure that before you publish, if you're going, and all these pictures will do their rounds on social media, but by the time you see it on the screen of a credible media house, then it has gone through the verification process. And that is very, very critical now. The answer lies in training, and training continues every day because they're evolving issues, they're evolving challenges, and you have to deal with them as they come.
Well, let me ask you one last question from another student of mine, and he is one of my former students in the PR track. Now he's a graduate student starting his MA, David Stark. How are we seeing propaganda and hate speech spread through areas in Kenya or other parts of Africa in the media? Is that a common problem such as how we see in countries such as the United States?
Yes, I think that, like I said, the practice, the issues definitely just cut across the world, but they have to be contextualized. For example, it is very in Kenya, it has been very difficult to tell what hate speech is, because there is no acceptable definition of hate speech. So hate speech has to be contextualized. Most important, it has to be taken in context, because the people, a lot of politicians have used hate speech, but and made it look like it's a joke, and made it look like it's a political rally, because unless you are targeting, some who makes, for example, the personality. If somebody tells me whatever it is that can amount to hate speech, we begin to check who is Racheal. Am I a personality that insult directed at me, the person, or at the community that I'm representing? Because if it's me, the person, then it's different. Because the context, the person, the message, the way it's been crafted, the cultural understanding around, the words that have been used, because some are put into cultural context to make it look like it's acceptable, but actually it's an insult against another community. And like I said, for us, I think the biggest challenge in Kenya is the tribal conflict or the tribal hatred, one tribe against the other, as opposed to maybe in the US, where it could be minority and majority, So hate speech has to be contextualized over and above everything, has to be understood in terms of the definition, the harm, the magnitude, how many people is it harming? Is it just that one person, or is it a community? Is it a country? Is it, a whole tribe? So I think I think that the basis of understanding hate speech is understanding the context, understanding it fully, and the forces, the teams that are involved. Because sometimes it starts with two people, and then it escalates into a crisis because now it involves groups, not the two people anymore. And so once it becomes a communal thing, it is, for example, my tribe in Kenya would refer to our neighboring tribe using certain names that are a bit, have connotations. And so if I use those names within that context and called even one person from that community using that that name, then I'll actually be, it's hate speech because it is against that community. Mm-hmm. But if I just told that person by name, Rachel, you're stupid, I think it would be taken in a different context. So I think when you're dealing with
Oops. I think the connection is dropping a little bit. Is the same happening to all of you, my students? Okay, so it seems that the connection stopped just on time. Okay, I'll write to her. We are actually at exactly an hour since we really started with the questions. So I will stop now and I will explain to Racheal. Yeah, actually the whole connection dropped. Okay, so thank you very much for your time. I'll wait for your reactions and I'll go on with these interviews. I think they are very interesting because these are people that are local, that are in the industry, and they are there. So they can share with us a whole array of personal experiences. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you very much too.
Bye.
See ya, bye.